Before the stone cities, before the temples rose above the jungles, before the pyramids aligned with stars, the Maya told stories of how the world began. These stories were not merely legends, they were the threads of time itself, woven into the fabric of daily life, whispered in homes and sung in rituals. They came from the sacred book known as the Popol Vuh, a memory of creation passed from mouth to mouth, guarded through generations. In the beginning, there was only the sky above and the sea below. No earth, no people, no sun, no moon, all was silence. The gods gathered in this quiet darkness, speaking together of what should be made. They were creators and shapers, forming thoughts into worlds. They decided that the earth should exist, that the mountains should rise, that trees and rivers should flow. With a word, they summoned land from the sea, and with another they called forth the animals. Jaguars prowled, birds flew, fish darted in rivers, and deer leapt across the plains. But the animals could not speak the sacred words of praise. They could not honor the gods with language, nor remember the cycles of time. And so the gods decreed that the animals would remain as they were, each with its voice, its cry, its call, but none with the speech of reverence. Humans would have to be made. The first attempt was fragile. The gods shaped men of mud, soft and formless. They could not stand. They dissolved in the rain, their faces melted away. The creators watched and sighed. This first people were too weak, and so they were swept away. Next came men of wood, carved from trees. They multiplied, they filled the earth, and for a time it seemed the creation was successful. But these people had no hearts, no souls. They spoke words, but their words were hollow. They gave no thanks to the gods. Their faces were dry, their eyes empty. And so the gods sent ruin upon them. The wooden men were destroyed by a flood, their bodies broken, their faces pecked away by birds, their bones gnawed by animals. From their fragments, it is said, came the monkeys, chattering in the treetops, reminders of a failed creation. The gods gathered once more. They had formed men of mud, of wood, and both had failed. Now they sought the true substance of humanity, and so they turned to maize, the sacred corn, the heart of the Maya world. From yellow and white kernels, they ground the dough of flesh. With water they shaped bodies. With maize they formed arms and legs, faces and hearts. From the breath of the gods came life. And at last, the first true humans stood upon the earth. They were men of maize, people of corn, the children of both gods and earth. This was the beginning, the origin that tied every Maya person to maize, not only as food but as essence. To eat was to renew the bond with creation. To plant was to repeat the god's gift. Every stalk that grew, every kernel that ripened, was a reminder that humanity itself was born of corn. But creation was not complete without time. For the Maya, time was not simply days and nights, suns and moons. Time was sacred, alive, a divine rhythm that shaped the destiny of all things. The gods set the sky in motion, placing the sun, the moon, and the stars in their courses. They created great cycles, each turning like wheels upon wheels, marking eras that would rise and fall. To the Maya, time was a great fabric woven by the gods. It was measured with precision. The Hab, a 365-day solar year. The Tzolkin, a 260-day sacred cycle. And together they turned in harmony, forming a calendar round of 52 years, a sacred era, after which the cycles renewed. Beyond these lay even greater reckonings, the long count calendar that stretched across millennia, measuring not only human lives, but the very ages of the world. Imagine, as you close your eyes, a Maya priest standing upon a high temple platform. Before him stretches the jungle, green and endless. Above, the night sky is ablaze with stars. He holds in his hand a codex of painted glyphs, his eyes tracing the patterns of Venus, the crossings of the moon, the return of the sun. To him, these are not distant or cold. They are gods moving across the heavens, divine signs that reveal when to plant, when to harvest, when to wage war, when to honor the ancestors. Time itself breathes with power. In these early centuries, long before the rise of Tikal or Chichen Itza, the people carried these myths and this calendar deep in their hearts. Villages grew around maize fields, small shrines were raised to the gods of rain and sun, and every ritual, every offering, every festival was tied to the cycles of sacred time. Children learned that they were made of maize, that their lives were bound to the turning of the heavens, that their duty was to remember, to honor, to continue the balance set by the gods. And so the Maya world began, with creation, with corn, with time itself sanctified. Their myths were not mere stories told to pass the night. They were the framework of existence, the reason the sun rose, the cause of rain, the meaning of life. To forget them was unthinkable, for in remembering them, the Maya remembered who they were. As you drift deeper into rest, picture the endless cycles of Maya time. Imagine the slow movement of stars over a jungle sky, the steady rhythm of days and seasons. Imagine a stalk of maize growing tall in the fields, its roots in the earth, its leaves reaching to the heavens, its kernels shining like golden flesh. This was the first human, the true creation, the beginning of a people who would build cities of stone, study the heavens, and leave their mark upon eternity. The Maya story begins with gods and myths, but it flows onward into history, where the children of maize will raise pyramids and kingdoms. And so the tale continues, from sacred time into human time, as the first villages take root in the forests of Mesoamerica. The story of the Maya does not leap suddenly into towering pyramids and grand kings. Like the maize that nourished them, their civilization began as a tender sprout, small and fragile, rooted in soil, and nurtured over centuries before it grew into greatness. Long before the classic cities rose from the jungles, there were families scattered across the valleys and plains of what is now Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and the Yucatan Peninsula. As early as 2000 BCE, people here planted maize, beans, and squash, learning how to coax life from the earth even in the challenges of tropical forests and unpredictable rains. Imagine these first settlers, their homes simple huts of wood and thatch, clustered in small villages. Smoke rises gently from hearths, where maize is ground on stone metates into dough, then shaped into tortillas and tamales. The air carries the scent of roasting corn, mingled with the sweet fragrance of cacao beans drying in the sun. Children chase one another along paths, while dogs and turkeys wander among the homes. Life is modest, yet it hums with rhythm and purpose. These early Maya communities lived close to the land. Fields were cut from the jungle, cleared by fire, and fertilized by ash. They rotated their crops carefully, knowing that the soil could tire if pushed too hard. In wetter regions, they built raised fields to keep roots above flooding waters. In drier lands, they dug reservoirs to hold the rains. Everywhere, maize was the heart of life, not just food, but the essence of their being. To eat was to renew the sacred gift of creation, but life was not only about survival. Even in these earliest times, there were hints of the grandeur to come. In the center of villages rose small platforms of stone and earth, early versions of the temples that would later dominate Maya cities. Families left offerings of jade beads, shells, or food, tokens of gratitude to the gods of maize, rain, and sun. Fire burned in clay braziers, carrying prayers upward on spirals of smoke. Over time, these villages grew. Farmers became artisans, shaping obsidian into sharp blades, jade into beads, clay into painted pottery. Traders carried goods between communities, salt from the coasts, cacao from the forests, feathers from distant lands. With trade came stories, knowledge, and new ideas. Villages connected into networks, and slowly, the first ceremonial centers appeared. Archaeologists have uncovered places like Nakbe and El Mirador in the Guatemalan lowlands, vast sites that emerged centuries before the more famous cities of Tikal or Palenque. Here, even as early as 800 BCE, great platforms and pyramids were raised, their sheer size a testament to communal effort. Imagine hundreds of villagers carrying baskets of earth and stone, shaping massive structures that reached above the canopy. These were not just buildings, they were mountains made by human hands, sacred places where heaven and earth could meet. Rituals grew more elaborate. Priests learned to read the sky, noting the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. They aligned their temples with celestial patterns, so that on certain days, the sun would rise directly over a pyramid, or shine perfectly down a staircase. Time itself was woven into stone. As night fell, fires burned in the plazas. Priests chanted hymns, their voices rising with the sound of drums and flutes. Families gathered to watch dancers wearing jaguar skins and feathered masks, reenacting the myths of creation, the battles of the hero twins, the journey of the maize god into the underworld, the endless cycle of death and rebirth. For the Maya, myth was not a tale of the past but a living truth, reenacted with every passing day. Through these centuries, the Maya identity took root. Their language, already rich in poetry and metaphor, evolved into written glyphs carved on stone and painted on bark paper codices. Though the earliest examples are faint, they would one day become one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the ancient world. With words, the Maya could preserve history, tell the stories of their rulers and chart the great cycles of time. The villages grew into towns, and the towns into early cities. Each had its own rulers, men and sometimes women who claimed descent from the gods and proved their right to lead through rituals of sacrifice. Unlike the empires of later centuries, these early polities were small, scattered, and often peaceful, more concerned with agriculture and trade than conquest. But the seeds of kingship, war, and empire were already sown. As you rest, picture these first Maya communities. The air is heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the jungle hums with the calls of insects and birds. In the plaza, villagers gather at dusk. A priest lights a fire, and sparks rise like stars into the night. Around him, families kneel, whispering prayers for rain, for health, for the growth of maize. Beyond the village, the dark outline of a pyramid rises against the sky, not yet grand, not yet eternal, but already sacred. These were the beginnings. Simple homes, careful farmers, humble shrines. Yet within them lay the blueprint for greatness. From these villages would come the builders of Tikal, the astronomers of Chichen Itza, the poets of Palenque. The Maya story had begun quietly, in maize fields and thatched homes, in offerings of shells and jade. But soon it would thunder into an age of stone cities, rival kings, and temples that touched the heavens. The quiet villages of the Maya heartlands grew steadily across the centuries, spreading their maize fields and shrines across the valleys, jungles, and coasts. But by around 250 CE, something began to change. What had been small towns and modest ceremonial centers blossomed into vast cities, filled with temples, palaces, ball courts, and plazas. It was the beginning of what we now call the classic age of the Maya, the time when their civilization reached its greatest heights. Imagine the jungles of Guatemala and Mexico during this time. The green canopy stretches endlessly, but above it, tall pyramids rise like mountains of stone. Their sides are steep, their staircases soaring skyward, their summits crowned with temples. These were not natural peaks, but monuments shaped by human hands, and at their tops, kings and priests stood, performing rituals that bound earth to heaven. Among the greatest of these cities was Tikal, a kingdom that rose to dominate the central lowlands. Its pyramids towered above the trees, some reaching more than 200 feet high. From the top, one could see endless miles of jungle, broken only by the outlines of other pyramids on the horizon. In the plazas below, nobles paraded in feathered headdresses, warriors carried obsidian blades, and merchants displayed goods from far-off lands, jade from the Motagua Valley, cacao from the forests, shells from the seas. But Tikal was not alone. To the north and south, cities like Palenque, Copan, Calakmul, and Caracol thrived, each with its own dynasties, its own gods, its own ambitions. Some cities were allies, others rivals, but all shared the same devotion to ritual astronomy and the cycles of time. At the heart of each city was a sacred precinct, great plazas surrounded by temples and palaces. These spaces were alive with ceremony. Priests lit fires of copal incense, its fragrant smoke curling toward the heavens. Drums and conch shells echoed through the courtyards. Dancers in jaguar skins and brilliant feathers reenacted the myths of creation. Every building, every ritual, every carving was a reminder of the gods' role in sustaining the world. The kings of the classic age were not mere rulers, but divine intermediaries. They wore crowns of jade and cloaks of quetzal feathers, shimmering green in the sunlight. Their faces were carved into stelae tall stone monuments, inscribed with hieroglyphs that recorded their reigns. These stelae told of battles won, captives taken, temples built, rituals performed. To stand in a plaza surrounded by such monuments was to stand among the echoes of eternity, where history itself was etched into stone. Life in these great cities was not limited to kings and priests. Farmers from surrounding villages brought food to sustain the urban populations. Artisans filled workshops, carving intricate glyphs, shaping pottery, and painting murals with vivid reds, blues, and blacks. Traders moved along causeways and rivers, carrying salt, honey, cotton, and obsidian. At the markets, cacao beans were counted as currency, exchanged for goods both humble and precious. And there was sport, too, the sacred ball game. Each city had its ball courts, where teams competed using a heavy rubber ball that had to be struck with hips and thighs, never hands or feet. To the Maya, this was not just play, but ritual, a reenactment of the battles of the hero twins from the Popol Vuh, who defeated the lords of the underworld in a cosmic ball game. Sometimes the stakes were life and death, with captives offered as sacrifices at the game's end. The Maya were also builders of remarkable sophistication. Their temples and palaces were not random, but aligned with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. At Copan, stairways were carved with thousands of glyphs forming the longest known Maya inscription. At Palenque, the temple of the inscriptions held the tomb of King Pakal, his jade death mask glimmering in the darkness. At Calakmul, rival to Tikal, twin pyramids faced each other like guardians of the sky, monuments to power and ambition. The cities were linked not only by trade, but by politics and war. Rivalries stretched across centuries. Tikal and Calakmul waged struggles that involved shifting alliances, battles, and betrayals. Victories brought prestige, captives, and tribute. Defeats left scars on dynasties, recorded forever in glyphs. Yet even in war, the Maya kept their sense of sacred order, for conflict itself was part of the cosmic balance, a way to feed the gods with the blood of warriors. And all the while the priests observed the heavens, they tracked the cycles of Venus, marking its appearances and disappearances with care. They predicted eclipses, charted the seasons, and kept calendars with extraordinary accuracy. To them the stars were not distant or silent. They were messages, guiding when to plant, when to harvest, when to make war, when to honor the gods. As you drift into sleep, imagine walking through one of these cities at dusk. The stone streets are alive with color walls painted in reds and blues, torches flickering as night falls. From the temples comes the sound of chanting, the steady rhythm of drums echoing against the stone. Above, the stars emerge, bright in the dark sky. And at the very center a pyramid rises, its staircase steep, its temple glowing with firelight. This is not merely a city, it is a reflection of the cosmos, a mirror of heaven upon earth. By the height of the classic age, the Maya had transformed their world. From small villages they had built kingdoms of stone, each one a jewel in the endless jungle. Their cities stood as both earthly homes and divine centers, places where humans and gods met, where time itself was measured in ritual and stone. The rise of these great cities was a triumph of vision, labor, and faith. But with power came rivalry, and with rivalry came conflict. The Maya world was not united but fractured into kingdoms that both flourished and fought. In the centuries to come, these rivalries would deepen, shaping both the glory and the decline of the classic age. For now, though, in this chapter of their story, the cities rise, the pyramids gleam, and the Maya world shines at its zenith, a civilization of beauty, devotion, and cosmic ambition. In the Maya world, power was not only political as it was sacred. Kings and queens were not seen as ordinary rulers, but as living bridges between humanity and the gods. Their blood, their rituals, and their very presence sustained the balance of the cosmos. To rule was not merely to command armies or oversee trade, but to carry the weight of the heavens upon one's shoulders. The Maya called their rulers Kuhul Ajau, or Holy Lord. The title itself tells us everything. They were divine lords set apart, chosen not only by lineage but by the gods themselves. Their crowns of jade and headdresses of brilliant quetzal feathers were not decorations but symbols of this connection. When a king stood in a temple plaza, dressed in shimmering green feathers, his body painted in reds and blacks, he was not merely a man. He was the embodiment of myth, the earthly form of ancestors and deities who lived through him. Power was hereditary, passed down through dynasties carefully recorded in stone glyphs. Stelae told of fathers, sons and grandsons, stretching back generations. To inscribe one's lineage upon stone was to declare legitimacy, to remind all who saw that a ruler's authority flowed directly from divine ancestors. These carvings were not history as we think of it. They were eternal affirmations, keeping dynasties alive even after the bones of kings had turned to dust. Rituals were central to kingship, and none more so than the act of bloodletting. Maya rulers pierced their tongues, ears, or even genitals with stingray spines or obsidian blades, letting their blood fall onto strips of paper, which were then burned. The rising smoke carried the essence of the ruler into the heavens, nourishing the gods and opening portals between worlds. In visions born of pain and trance, rulers saw ancestral spirits or divine beings, proving their sacred role as mediators of the cosmos. Queens too played vital roles. One of the most famous was Lady Zok of Yaxchilan. She is depicted on stone lintels performing bloodletting, pulling a thorn-studded rope through her tongue, the blood falling onto bark paper below. From the smoke, a vision serpent rises, and within its jaws emerges a warrior spirit. This vision is not private but public, performed for her people, showing that the queen herself could call upon the gods to guide and protect her city. Far from passive figures, Maya queens were often political actors, leading armies, negotiating alliances, and sustaining dynasties through both ceremony and bloodline. In Palenque, another powerful queen emerged, Lady Sak Kuk, who ruled in her own right before passing power to her son, the great King Pakal. Her presence ensured the continuity of the dynasty during times of crisis, demonstrating that Maya women could wield authority with both political and sacred weight. The lives of kings and queens were carefully staged, bound by cycles of time. Inscriptions record important anniversaries, the birth of an heir, the taking of the throne, the completion of great calendar cycles. Every ritual was tied to cosmic order. To rule was to align oneself with the turning of the heavens, to ensure that the sun would rise, the rains would fall, and the maize would grow. War too was part of this sacred duty. Victories on the battlefield were not merely political triumphs, but cosmic victories, proving that the gods favored a ruler. Captives, often rival nobles, were paraded before crowds, then sacrificed in public rituals. Their blood fed the gods, their deaths sanctified the ruler's reign. On monuments, kings are often shown towering above bound captives, declaring through image and glyph that their divine mandate was unquestionable. Life at court revolved around ceremony. Imagine a royal palace in Copan or Palenque, wide courtyards filled with nobles, scribes and artisans. Servants carry cacao drinks in painted vessels, their surfaces adorned with glyphs, spelling out their contents. Musicians play drums, rattles and flutes as dancers in elaborate costumes reenact the myths of creation. And at the center, the king and queen sit upon thrones of stone, adorned in jade and feathers, their faces painted, their every movement watched by all. To the common people, the rulers were distant but vital. Farmers and artisans may never have spoken to their king, but they offered tribute to sustain him, knowing that his rituals ensured the fertility of their fields and the balance of the world. In times of drought or disaster, all eyes turned to the palace. If the rains failed, if enemies triumphed, it was the ruler's responsibility to restore order through sacrifice and ceremony. As night fell, kings often ascended to the tops of temples. From there they could see the stars wheel across the sky, the Milky Way stretching like a cosmic river above. To the Maya, this was not a cold distance, but a living realm. The king stood at the threshold, between the earthly and the divine, performing rituals that bound his city to the very fabric of the cosmos. As you drift into rest, picture one such moment, A Maya king stands upon a pyramid, torches flickering around him. He pierces his flesh and his blood falls onto bark paper. The paper is burned, and from the smoke a vision serpent rises, glowing in the night. Within its jaws an ancestor appears, whispering counsel to the ruler. Below, the city sleeps, its people unaware of the sacred drama unfolding above. Yet their lives depend upon it, for through this ritual the cosmos is kept in balance. Kings and queens of the Maya were not rulers as we know them today. They were the living embodiment of myth, the keepers of time, the bridges between humans and gods. Their power was absolute, yet it was also fragile, for it depended upon constant proof, victories in war, blood in sacrifice, alignments in time. Without these, their authority could crumble, and their cities could fall into chaos. But in this chapter of history, their power held firm. Dynasties flourished, monuments multiplied, and the names of kings and queens were carved forever into stone. They became eternal, their likenesses gazing out across centuries, their stories still told in glyphs that speak to us today. The Maya world was a world of sacred kingship, where rulers bore not only crowns, but cosmic responsibility. And as their dynasties thrived, their cities grew ever more magnificent, until rivalry, ambition, and the hunger for dominance led to wars that would shape the destiny of the Maya for generations. For all their devotion to the gods and their reverence for time, the Maya were also a people of rivalry. Their great cities did not exist in harmony, but in competition, each one vying for prestige, for power, and for the favor of the gods. The jungle was alive not only with the sounds of birds and insects, but with the tramp of warriors, the clash of obsidian blades, and the echo of drums that signaled battle. At the heart of these rivalries stood two titans, Tikal and Calakmul. Both rose to extraordinary power during the Classic Age, and for centuries they faced each other across the forests of the lowlands like jaguars circling in the shadows. Their wars were not short or simple. They were long struggles of alliances and betrayals, victories and defeats, woven into the very fabric of Maya history. Imagine Tikal, its towering pyramids rising above the canopy, its plazas filled with monuments boasting of victories. The kings of Tikal claimed divine descent and ruled with confidence, their scribes recording triumphs in glyphs that still speak from stone. Now imagine Calakmul, a rival city to the north, equally vast, with its own proud kings and its own stele of power. Between them lay smaller cities, some loyal to Tikal, others to Calakmul, many shifting sides when fortune changed. War between these cities was both sacred and strategic. It was fought not for territory alone, but for captives, for prestige, for proof that the gods favored one dynasty over another. A captured noble was more valuable than a battlefield victory, for he could be displayed in triumph, his sacrifice feeding the gods and sanctifying his conqueror's rule. Picture a Maya battlefield. Warriors march painted in bright colors, their bodies adorned with feathers and jaguar skins. They carry shields of wood and leather, spears tipped with obsidian, and the terrifying makuahuitl, a wooden club edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades, capable of cutting as deep as steel. Drums beat in the distance, and conch shells wail across the jungle. Battle is fierce, but it is also ritualized. Nobles seek nobles, kings seek kings, for the capture of a rival lord brings greater honor than the deaths of 100 common soldiers. Inscriptions tell us of moments when these rivalries shifted the balance of the entire Maya world. In 562 CE, Tikal suffered a devastating defeat at the hands of Calakmul and its allies. Known as the Star War, this victory shattered Tikal's dominance, plunging it into decline for more than a century. Calakmul in turn rose to supremacy, forging a web of alliances that stretched across the lowlands. Yet in time, Tikal would recover, striking back with renewed strength, reclaiming its place as one of the greatest Maya powers. These wars were not only fought with weapons but with diplomacy. Cities formed alliances sealed by marriage, tribute, or shared enemies. Envoys carried messages through the jungles, and shifting loyalties kept the balance of power in constant motion. A smaller city might find protection by siding with one of the great powers, but such protection came at a price: tribute in goods, warriors, or loyalty in war. Within the cities themselves, victory was celebrated with grandeur. Captives were paraded through plazas, bound and humiliated, while kings proclaimed their triumphs from atop pyramids. Murals like those at Bonampak depict scenes of war and its aftermath: nobles in elegant dress, warriors drenched in blood, prisoners awaiting sacrifice. These images were not hidden, but displayed publicly, reminders to all that war was not merely politics, but the will of the gods. And yet, for all its brutality, war also fueled creativity. Victories funded new temples, new monuments, new works of art. The rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul pushed both cities to greater heights, as each sought to outshine the other in splendor. Temples grew taller, plazas wider, monuments more numerous. Even in conflict, the Maya found expression in stone, leaving behind a legacy of grandeur carved from rivalry. Beyond the kings and their armies, the common people bore the weight of war. Farmers provided food for campaigns, artisans crafted weapons and armor, and families mourned sons lost in battle. Tribute demanded by victors meant heavier burdens, more labor, more sacrifice. And yet in their eyes these struggles were not meaningless. To support their rulers was to maintain the cosmic balance, to ensure that the gods received the blood and devotion they required. As you drift into rest, imagine the quiet after battle. The jungle is hushed, the cries of war replaced by the distant call of birds. Smoke lingers over the fields, and in the plazas of great cities, rituals are performed to honor the gods with the blood of captives. For the Maya, war was never an end in itself, but part of a cycle. Victory and defeat, rise and fall, all woven into the great turning of time. The rivalry of Tikal and Calakmul would define much of the Classic Age, but they were not alone. Dozens of cities participated in this web of competition, each one striving for glory, each one leaving its mark on history. Some would rise only briefly before being swallowed by stronger neighbors. Others would endure for centuries, their monuments standing long after their kings were forgotten. In the endless green of the jungle, these rivalries echoed like thunder, shaping the destiny of a civilization. The Maya world was a tapestry of kingdoms, each thread pulled tight by ambition, each knot bound by both devotion and rivalry. Out of this tension came both beauty and destruction, triumphs of art and collapses of dynasties. And so the story of the Maya continued, with war as both a curse and a catalyst. For in the shadow of rivalry, everyday life still unfolded, farmers tending maize, artisans shaping jade, markets bustling with trade. It is there among the humble and the ordinary that we next turn, to see how the people who sustained these kingdoms lived, worked and dreamed in the shadow of their towering cities. Behind the soaring pyramids and the grandeur of kings, the Maya world was sustained by countless ordinary people. Farmers, artisans, traders and families filled the forests and valleys, each life a thread in the great tapestry of their civilization. Without them, the temples would not have been built, the wars could not have been fought, and the rituals of kings and queens would have had no meaning. To understand the Maya is not only to look at their rulers, but to walk through the villages and marketplaces where daily life unfolded. At the heart of Maya life was the milpa, the maize field. Families rose at dawn, the air still cool, carrying stone tools and baskets. Men cut and cleared plots in the jungle, planting maize alongside beans and squash, the three sisters that grew together in harmony. Maize provided the tall stalks, beans climbed the stalks and enriched the soil, and squash spread broad leaves across the ground, keeping it moist. Women ground maize into dough on heavy stone metates, their hands and shoulders strong from the daily labor. From this came tortillas, tamales and atole, the corn drink that nourished both body and spirit. Life revolved around these fields. Planting and harvest were marked by festivals, offerings and prayers to the gods of maize and rain. Families placed ears of corn on household altars, thanking the gods for their gift of sustenance. To eat was not simply to fill the stomach, but to renew the sacred covenant that tied humans to creation itself. Villages and towns stretched across the landscape, homes built of wattle and daub with thatched palm roofs. In one corner of each house, a small shrine stood with offerings of food, incense or figurines, for the gods were present not only in temples, but in every household. Children played in courtyards, chasing turkeys or helping with chores, While elders passed on stories of ancestors and myths of the gods, dogs barked, parrots squawked, and the hum of insects filled the air. Life was busy, but it was also woven with rhythm and ritual. Markets were the beating heart of Maya towns and cities. On certain days, plazas filled with vendors displaying goods upon mats. Salt from the coasts, cacao beans counted carefully for trade, cotton cloth dyed in vivid colors, obsidian blades sharp as glass, honey in clay pots and bright feathers of the quetzal bird. Farmers brought maize, beans, peppers and tomatoes, while hunters offered venison or rabbit. The buzz of bargaining filled the air as people exchanged goods not with coins, but with cacao beans, salt or cloth as currency. Artisans held honored places in this society. Skilled hands carved jade into beads and pendants, their green shimmer treasured as sacred stone. Obsidian was shaped into knives and arrowheads, gleaming black in the light. Potters created vessels painted with scenes of kings, gods and animals, their designs as much storytelling as decoration. Weavers spun cotton into fine textiles, dyed with indigo and cochineal red, their patterns holding symbols of lineage and belief. Each craft was not just labor but devotion, a way of shaping the sacred into daily life. And then there was the ball game, played in courts found in nearly every city. The court was a long, narrow space with high, sloping walls where teams faced one another with a heavy rubber ball. The rules were strict. The ball could not be struck with hands or feet, but with hips, elbows or knees. The sound of the ball striking stone echoed like thunder, and the game carried deep meaning. It was not merely sport, but a reenactment of cosmic myth, the hero twins who defeated the lords of the underworld in their ball game of life and death. In some matches, the stakes were ritual. Captives or even players might be sacrificed, their blood feeding the gods. For spectators, it was thrilling. For participants, it was sacred destiny. Religion infused every corner of daily life. Farmers prayed for rain before planting. Mothers sprinkled incense before preparing meals. Travelers made offerings at crossroads. Priests conducted larger ceremonies in plazas. But ordinary families also lived within cycles of ritual. Festivals marked the calendar, dances in masks, processions with music, offerings of flowers, food, and even blood. Time itself was measured not only in days, but in sacred cycles that touched every aspect of existence. Education began at home, with parents teaching children their roles. Boys learned to farm, hunt or craft, while girls learned to grind maize, weave and manage households. But for the children of nobles, there were schools where scribes taught glyphs and numbers, preparing them for roles as priests, administrators or scribes themselves. To read and write was a gift reserved for the elite, but its influence touched all. For through glyphs came history, prophecy, and the memory of dynasties. Food, beyond maize, was rich and varied. The Maya drank cacao mixed with chili and honey, a bitter, spiced drink reserved for the wealthy or for ritual. They ate beans, squash, peppers, and tomatoes, along with turkey, fish, and venison. They cultivated orchards of avocados and plums, and in the forests they gathered honey, roots, and wild fruits. Meals were communal, and feasting was central to festivals, where entire communities shared in food and drink as part of honoring the gods. As night descended, families gathered by the glow of fires. Stories were told of gods and heroes, of ancestors and kings. The Milky Way stretched above like a celestial river, and the constellations were not distant stars but familiar companions, jaguars, serpents, birds. Time was alive, and every person, from farmer to king, lived within its sacred flow. As you drift into rest, imagine walking through a Maya village at dusk. Smoke rises from hearths, carrying the scent of roasting maize. Children laugh and chase fireflies, while elders sit telling stories. From a distance comes the steady beat of a drum, perhaps from a ritual at a nearby temple. The jungle hums, the stars appear, and the night folds gently around the homes. It is a world both ordinary and sacred, where every act, from grinding maize to playing the ball game, carries meaning beyond itself. The grandeur of kings and temples may dominate the monuments, but it was here in the daily lives of the people that the Maya civilization truly lived. Their hands built the cities, their maize sustained the rulers, their devotion gave meaning to rituals. Without them, the pyramids would be silent, the glyphs unread, the temples empty. The Maya world was as much about the humble rhythms of daily life as it was about the cosmic ambitions of kings. And it was through this balance between ruler and farmer, priest and artisan, sacred and ordinary, that the civilization flourished. Yet beyond farming and markets, beyond families and rituals, the Maya carried another gift, their extraordinary knowledge of the heavens and of time. From daily life, we now turn to their mastery of the stars, to see how they measured the cosmos itself and wrote eternity into their calendars. For the Maya, the sky was not empty space. It was alive, a vast and eternal canvas upon which the gods painted their will. The movements of the sun, the moon, Venus, and the stars were not random. They were messages, patterns in the fabric of creation. To live as a Maya was to live within these cycles, to measure time not as something passing but as something sacred. Each night, as the jungle settled into stillness, Maya priests climbed to the tops of their temples and observatories. Torches flickered at their sides, but their eyes were fixed upon the heavens. They watched as Venus glimmered like a jewel before dawn, as the moon's phases waxed and waned, as constellations rose and fell with the seasons. From these observations, they recorded the dance of the cosmos in glyphs and numbers, crafting calendars of astonishing precision. The Maya measured time in multiple layers, each one turning like a wheel within a wheel. The Hab, their solar year, was divided into 18 months of 20 days, plus 5 nameless days considered dangerous, when the world was out of balance. Alongside this ran the Tzolk'in, a sacred cycle of 260 days, each day marked by a unique combination of numbers and symbols. Together, the Hab and the Tzolk'in formed a grand calendar round of 52 years, a cycle that echoed the rhythm of generations. But beyond even this lay the long count, a reckoning of vast time that stretched across thousands of years. With it, the Maya could place events far into the past or future, linking human history to the great cosmic cycles. The carving of dates on stelae was not simply record-keeping. It was the weaving of human lives into eternity, showing that a king's reign was part of a cycle as old as creation itself. Imagine standing in Chichen Itza, at the foot of the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan, El Castillo. Twice each year on the equinox, the setting sun casts a shadow along the pyramid's staircase. Slowly, as the light shifts, the shadow forms the body of a serpent, descending the steps until it meets the stone serpent head carved at the base. This was no accident. It was a masterpiece of architecture and astronomy combined, a ritual in stone and light that reminded the people of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, descending to bless the earth. Or picture El Caracol, the snail observatory at Chichen Itza, with its rounded tower aligned to the movements of Venus. From here, priests tracked the brilliant star's cycle, noting its rising as morning star and its reappearance as evening star. Venus was tied to war and fate, its brilliance signaling omens of battle and destiny. To the Maya, Venus was not just a planet, but a god whose path across the heavens carried meaning for kings and kingdoms. Astronomy was not separate from daily life, it guided it. Farmers planted maize by the movements of the stars. Festivals were timed to celestial events. Wars were planned to coincide with Venus's rise. Every action, great or small, fit within the grand choreography of the heavens. Numbers, too, carried sacred weight. The Maya used a vigesimal system, counting in 20s, and with it, they could calculate vast spans of time. They invented the concept of zero long before much of the world, representing it with a simple shell glyph. This allowed them to measure cycles with extraordinary precision, to predict eclipses and solstices, to weave human ritual into cosmic rhythm, and time itself was not seen as linear, but as cyclical. Just as the maize sprouted, grew, withered, and returned, so too did ages rise and fall, repeating endlessly. The gods had created worlds before, and they would create them again. To live within this cycle was to understand that every beginning carried its end, and every end carried a new beginning. Priests, known as day-keepers, held the knowledge of these cycles. They memorized the sacred almanacs, the patterns of days, the meanings of numbers and signs. To them, each day was alive with personality, a spirit with strengths and dangers. They advised rulers when to make war, farmers when to sow, families when to marry or name a child. Time itself was alive, and the day-keepers were its interpreters. As you rest, imagine a night in the Maya world. The jungle hums softly, and above, the sky blazes with stars more numerous than you have ever seen. A priest kneels upon a temple platform, his eyes fixed on the path of Venus. He marks its rising with a brush on bark paper, his mind turning numbers into prophecy. Around him the city sleeps, unaware that their destinies are being charted in silence above. The Maya's mastery of time and the stars was more than science, it was devotion, a way of aligning human life with the eternal. Their calendars did not simply mark days, they gave meaning to them. Their observatories were not just towers, they were windows into the divine. Through their knowledge, they built a civilization that lived in harmony with both earth and sky. And yet even as they studied the stars, forces on earth, war, drought, ambition, would one day test the balance they worked so hard to maintain. For now, though, their world still turned with the rhythm of sacred time. Their temples still caught the light of the sun. Their priests still watched the heavens. The Maya stood as masters of time and the stars, their gaze fixed upon eternity. The Maya world had reached its zenith. Great cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Copan and Palenque shone with splendor, their pyramids rising above the jungle canopy, their rulers carving their names into eternal stone. Temples aligned with the heavens, markets bustled with trade, priests tracked the movements of stars, and artisans filled plazas with color and music. It must have seemed in those centuries that this civilization would endure forever. And yet, by the 9th century, a shadow began to fall across the Maya heartlands. Slowly, and then with accelerating force, the classic cities of the southern lowlands began to weaken, to crumble, to be abandoned. The collapse was not a single event, but a long unraveling, a gradual fading of glory. Archaeologists today still puzzle over its causes, for no single answer explains it all. There were many threads, all tightening together like a snare. One was overpopulation. The great cities demanded food for tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands. Farmers expanded fields deeper into the forests, but the soils of the lowlands were thin, quickly exhausted by constant planting. As populations grew, the land could no longer sustain them, and hunger pressed upon the people. Another was drought. Evidence from lake sediments and cave formations tells us that the 9th century saw repeated dry spells, long years when the rains failed. For a people whose lives depended on maize and whose rituals depended on the gift of water from the gods, these droughts were devastating. Crops withered, reservoirs dried, and prayers to Chak, the rain god, went unanswered. There was also warfare. The rivalries that had once fueled splendor now brought ruin. Cities fought more and more fiercely, desperate for captives, tribute and control of dwindling resources. Fortifications rose, murals showed scenes of battle, and monuments shifted from celebrating grand ceremonies to recording victories and defeats. The web of alliances that once bound the Maya world together frayed into open conflict. Political instability followed. Dynasties toppled, rulers were overthrown, and monuments ceased to be carved. In some cities, the last stelae were left unfinished, as if the artisans themselves abandoned their work mid-stroke. Without kings to perform the rituals, the sacred bond between people and gods faltered. The world, to the Maya, was not merely collapsing politically, it was collapsing cosmically. In the cities, plazas grew empty. Markets shrank, artisans laid down their tools, temples stood silent. Once bustling streets filled with weeds, and the jungle began to reclaim what had been taken from it. Roofs rotted, walls crumbled, and slowly, stone by stone, the monuments of greatness were swallowed by vines and roots. Imagine walking through Tikal or Copan in those final days. Once the plazas echoed with drums and chants. Now, only the cries of birds and the rustle of leaves filled the air. Families, once proud citizens of a great kingdom, drifted away to smaller villages seeking land, food, and safety. Cities that had stood for centuries fell quiet, their temples left to the silence of the forest. By around 900 CE, much of the southern lowland Maya world had emptied. Tikal, once mighty, lay abandoned. Copan, famed for its scholars and stelae, had fallen silent. Palenque, with its beautiful temples, was overgrown. The collapse was not total. The Maya people themselves did not disappear, but their way of life shifted dramatically. The classic age, with its towering cities and endless rivalries, had come to an end. And yet, even in this time of decline, resilience endured. While the southern cities faded, others continued in the north and along the coasts. Places like Uxmal and Chichen Itza began to rise, carrying Maya traditions into new forms. The collapse was not the end of a people, but the end of an era. Still, for those who had lived through it, the experience must have felt like the breaking of the world. To see dynasties fall, to watch temples crumble, to endure drought and hunger, it was as if the gods themselves had turned away. As you drift into rest, imagine a once proud pyramid now overgrown with vines, its steps cracked and worn. The jungle hums around it, reclaiming stone that had once touched the heavens. In the distance, a family leaves their home, carrying what little they can, walking toward uncertain futures. Behind them, their city disappears into silence. The collapse of the classic cities was a tragedy, but it was also a transformation. The Maya did not vanish. Their knowledge, their language, their devotion to maize and time continued, carried into new centers of power. The cities of the north would rise next, blending old traditions with new, and creating wonders that still dazzle the world today. The jungle had reclaimed the heartlands, but the spirit of the Maya remained unbroken. The jungles had reclaimed much of the southern lowlands, their silence swallowing once mighty cities like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque. But the Maya story did not end there. Even as vines crept over temples in the south, a new brilliance was dawning in the north in the limestone plains of the Yucatan Peninsula. Here, the Maya built cities that blended their ancient traditions with fresh influences, creating a second flowering of their civilization. This was the Northern Renaissance. Among the most splendid of these cities was Uxmal, its name meaning thrice built. Rising from the dry hills of western Yucatan, it shone with artistry and innovation. The Pyramid of the Magician, with its unusual oval base and towering height, stood at the city's heart, steep steps climbing toward a temple that touched the sky. Surrounding it were palaces decorated with intricate stone mosaics, masks of the rain god Chak, serpents, and geometric designs that shimmered like woven cloth. Uxmal's architecture carried grace and refinement, its patterns revealing a people who, even in times of change, still honored their gods with beauty in stone. But it was Chichen Itza that became the true jewel of the Northern Renaissance. Its rise began around the 9th century, and for centuries it grew into one of the most powerful cities in all Mesoamerica. Here, Maya traditions met influences from distant lands, particularly the Toltecs of central Mexico. Out of this blending emerged a city unlike any other, where the sacred and the political, the local and the foreign, wove together into grandeur. At the heart of Chichen Itza stood El Castillo, the temple of Kukulkan. This pyramid, square and symmetrical, was aligned with astonishing precision. Each side bore 91 steps, and with the top platform, the total reached 365 for each day of the solar year. Twice each year at the equinox, something extraordinary happened. As the sun set, shadows fell upon the pyramid staircase, forming the image of a serpent that slithered down the steps until it joined the carved serpent's head at the base. This was the feathered serpent god Kukulkan, descending from the heavens to bless the earth. Imagine the awe of the crowds gathered in the plaza, watching light and shadow reveal the presence of the divine. But Chichen Itza was more than a pyramid. It was a city of plazas, temples, ball courts, and sacred cenotes, natural wells that served as both sources of water and portals to the underworld. In the Great Ball Court, the largest in Mesoamerica, teams competed with a heavy rubber ball, striking it with hips and elbows, aiming to pass it through towering stone rings high on the walls. The acoustics of the court were so perfect that a whisper at one end could be heard at the other, a reminder that this was not only sport, but sacred theater. Victories, sacrifices, and myths were enacted here, binding human play to divine drama. Nearby stood the Temple of the Warriors, flanked by rows of carved stone columns. At its summit, a statue of a reclining figure, the Chak Mul, waited to receive offerings, bowls of food, incense, or even the still-beating hearts of captives. The blending of Maya and Toltec traditions brought new rituals, harsher perhaps, yet still bound by the same cosmic logic: blood to sustain the gods, devotion to keep the world in balance. The cenotes, deep sinkholes filled with water, were sacred places. The largest, known as the sacred cenote, was a site of offerings and sacrifices. Archaeologists have found jade, gold, obsidian, and even human remains within its depths. To stand at its edge was to stand at the threshold of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, where gifts were sent to the gods who dwelled below. Life in Chichen Itza was vibrant and diverse. Merchants filled its markets with goods from across Mesoamerica: cacao from the south, turquoise from the north, obsidian from the highlands, shells from the coasts. Artisans carved stone and painted murals depicting warriors, jaguars, and celestial scenes. Farmers cultivated maize in surrounding lands, sustaining the great city's population. The air was filled with the scents of incense and cacao, the sounds of drums and flutes, the sight of plazas crowded with worshippers. And throughout it all, the feathered serpent Kukulkan reigned as symbol and god. To the Maya, he embodied wisdom, wind, and renewal, a deity both terrifying and benevolent. His pyramid was not only a temple, but a calendar, a cosmic clock that bound the city to the heavens. Yet Chichen Itza was not alone. Other northern cities thrived in this era. Mayapan rose later, becoming a political and cultural hub, though it would eventually fall to conflict and betrayal. Along the coasts, cities like Tulum flourished, their walls facing the turquoise sea serving as ports for trade across the Caribbean. Each city carried its own character, but all were bound together in this renaissance of Maya culture. As you drift into rest, picture the plaza of Chichen Itza on an equinox evening. The crowd gathers in silence as the sun sinks toward the horizon. Slowly, the shadow serpent begins to appear, sliding step by step down the pyramid staircase. Gasps ripple through the people, for they are not merely watching a trick of light. They are witnessing the descent of a god, the promise that the cycles of time remain unbroken. Around you, the jungle hums, the torches flicker, and the stars begin to emerge, each one part of the vast calendar of heaven. The Northern Renaissance was not a rebirth of the old classic cities, but something new, a blending of tradition and innovation, of Maya roots and foreign influences. It proved the resilience of the Maya spirit, their ability to adapt, to create, to find beauty even after collapse. Yet even this golden age would not last forever. Conflict, ambition, and outside forces would one day weaken these cities, just as they had in the south. Still, for a time, the Maya shone brightly once more, their temples and pyramids standing as testaments to their genius, their devotion, and their cosmic vision. The cities of the north marked the final great flowering of Maya power. From here, the story moves into an age of fracturing kingdoms, of resistance against new invaders, and of survival against overwhelming odds. But for now, as you close your eyes, let the image of Chichen Itza linger, the serpent of light descending, the people in awe, the stars above turning in their eternal cycles. The Maya had fallen once, and yet they had risen again. The Northern Renaissance had given the Maya world new brilliance. Cities like Uxmal and Chichen Itza dazzled with artistry, astronomy, and ritual. But time, as the Maya knew well, is never still. By the 13th century, Chichen Itza's power waned, and new centers rose to claim its mantle. Among them were Mayapan, Tulum, and the scattered kingdoms that dotted the forests and coasts. These were the last Maya kingdoms, proud heirs of a 1,000-year tradition, standing on the edge of a changing world. Mayapan, in the heart of Yucatan, became the political and cultural capital after Chichen Itza's decline. Its walls enclosed a dense cluster of temples, shrines, and homes. Though smaller than its predecessor, it carried the echoes of Chichen Itza, pyramids dedicated to Kukulkan, painted murals, and bustling markets. Here, councils of nobles and powerful families ruled, weaving a fragile unity among the Yucatec Maya. Yet beneath the surface, rivalries smoldered. By the 15th century, Mayapan collapsed into rebellion, its walls torn down, its people scattering into smaller city-states. The unity of the North dissolved, leaving dozens of independent polities, each proud, each wary of its neighbors. Along the Caribbean coast, Tulum rose like a jewel against the turquoise sea. Perched on cliffs above the crashing waves, its stone walls enclosed temples and plazas that looked eastward toward the rising sun. Traders' canoes arrived at its beaches, laden with obsidian, jade, cacao, and feathers. Tulum thrived on commerce, a port that linked Maya lands with islands and distant shores. Imagine standing atop its cliffs at dawn, the sun breaking over the endless sea, casting light on temples painted in vivid reds and blues. To its people, Tulum was not only a city but a sentinel, watching both the heavens and the waters that carried life and trade. Elsewhere, cities like Tayasal in the Petén lowlands carried on traditions that had begun centuries before. Tayasal was built on an island in Lake Petén Itzá, its waters glimmering under the sun, its temples rising above the trees. Remote and defensible, it became a refuge of Maya independence, resisting outside powers long after others had fallen. Life in these later kingdoms remained deeply Maya. Maize was still planted in the fields, rituals still honored the gods of rain, maize, and sun. Ball games were still played, their courts echoing with the thud of rubber balls. Markets still bustled, their trade networks connecting distant peoples. Even as dynasties rose and fell, the rhythms of daily life endured, tied to cycles of time and the turning of the heavens. But the world around them was changing. To the west and north, the Great Mexica, the Aztecs, had risen in the Valley of Mexico, building an empire that stretched across much of Mesoamerica. Their power radiated outward, their merchants and warriors carrying influence even into Maya lands. Stories of their empire spread. Their capital Tenochtitlan, glittering on its island, their warriors feared for their ferocity, their markets overflowing with riches. The Maya kingdoms, fractured and diverse, could not match such unity. Still, the Maya endured, each kingdom clinging to its independence. In Yucatan, the land was divided among many small states, each with its own ruler, its own alliances and rivalries. They warred with one another, made peace and warred again as they had for centuries. Yet in this time of fragmentation, no single city rose to dominance as Tikal or Calakmul once had. The Maya world had become a mosaic of smaller powers, resilient but divided. As you drift into rest, imagine the Maya coast in these final centuries before the Spaniards arrived. Canoes glide across turquoise waters, paddled by traders carrying cacao and salt. Markets hum with voices as goods are exchanged. In the distance, temples rise above city walls, smoke curling from incense burners. Children laugh in courtyards. Elders tell stories of gods and ancestors, and priests mark the days upon their sacred calendars. Life continues, rich and vibrant, even as the shadows of change draw near. For these were the last independent centuries of the Maya, a time when their cities still flourished, their rituals still sustained the cosmos, their kings and queens still claimed sacred power. Yet beyond the horizon, ships with white sails would soon appear, bringing strangers unlike any they had ever known. The Spaniards were coming, and with them would come a new chapter of struggle, resistance, and survival. But for now, in the twilight of their independence, the Maya kingdom stood proud. Tulum watched the sunrise over the Caribbean. Tayasal glittered on its lake. Mayapan's ruins still whispered of unity lost. These cities were the final embers of a great fire, glowing brightly even as the winds of history shifted. The Maya were not finished. Their story, though scarred by conquest, would endure in ways their last kings could scarcely imagine. But that part of the tale still lies ahead. For now, the last kingdoms shine in memory, their temples kissed by the sea breeze, their people carrying on the sacred traditions of their ancestors, even as a storm gathered unseen beyond the horizon. The last Maya kingdoms had endured for centuries, shining like scattered jewels across the forests, lakes, and coasts of Mesoamerica. Their temples still rose above plazas, their markets still pulsed with trade, their priests still kept the sacred calendars. But in the early 16th century, sails appeared on the horizon. white sails billowing like the wings of giant birds, carrying men who spoke an unknown tongue, clad in steel, wielding weapons of thunder. The Spaniards had arrived. At first they came as strangers, stepping ashore on the coasts of Yucatan. The Maya, accustomed to traders from many lands, offered curiosity and caution. Yet it soon became clear that these men did not come merely to trade. They came to conquer. Their hunger was for land, gold, and souls to convert to their faith. Behind their steel and horses stood a crown and a church, each demanding dominion. The Spaniards had already faced the Mexica, the mighty Aztecs of Tenochtitlan, and against all odds they had brought their empire to its knees. With alliances, disease, and brutal force, they toppled a power that had once seemed invincible. Now their gaze turned to the Maya world, but the Maya were not one empire. They were dozens of kingdoms, each proud and fiercely independent. To conquer them would not be swift nor simple. In Yucatan, battles raged between the Spaniards and Maya city-states. The Maya fought with valor, using spears tipped with obsidian, bows that rained arrows, and ambushes in the jungle. They knew the land, the hidden paths, the secrets of survival. Time and again they resisted, and when defeated, they would melt back into the forests, only to rise again. The Spaniards found themselves facing not one enemy, but many, scattered yet unyielding. Disease, however, struck where swords could not. Smallpox, measles, and other illnesses swept through Maya communities, carried by the strangers from across the sea. Entire villages were emptied, leaders lost, families shattered. To the Maya, it seemed as if unseen gods of death had descended, indifferent and merciless. These plagues weakened resistance more than any weapon. And yet, even with such suffering, the Maya spirit refused to vanish. In some places, they fought for generations. Tayasal, the island city in Lake Petenitsa, became a beacon of resistance. For nearly 2 centuries after the fall of the Aztecs, Tayasal remained free, its people watching from their temples as Spaniards tried and failed to subdue them. Canoes glided across the lake, carrying warriors and traders, while above, smoke curled from incense burners. To live in Tayasal was to live in defiance, to hold on to the old ways while the world around them shifted. Neupaten, as Tayasal was also called, would not fall until 1697, long after most of the Americas had been claimed. Imagine it, Spanish cannons booming across the waters, their ships moving against the glimmering lake, firing upon temples that had stood for centuries. Warriors fought fiercely, but steel and firepower tore through defenses. At last, the last independent Maya city was taken, its sacred spaces desecrated, its people scattered. With its fall, the final ember of free Maya kingship was extinguished. Yet even as kingdoms fell, the Maya found ways to endure. Many retreated deeper into the forests, where Spaniards dared not follow. Villages hidden among trees and hills kept their traditions alive, planting maize, honoring the calendar, whispering prayers to Chak, to Ixchel, to the lords of Xibalba. Outwardly, they learned to adopt the new faith, attending churches and repeating Spanish prayers. But beneath, in the quiet of their homes and fields, they blended old and new, creating a faith uniquely their own. Crosses were carved, but adorned with sacred maize. Saints were honored, but seen as echoes of ancient gods. Resistance was not only in arms, but in memory. Stories were preserved in secret texts like the Popol Vuh, written down in Latin script, but carrying the voice of the ancestors. In its pages, the hero twins still journeyed through the underworld, maize still sprouted from sacrifice, and creation was renewed. These stories were whispers of resilience, proof that conquest could not silence the Maya soul. Imagine a Maya village in the years after conquest. A priest stands in the plaza, calling the people to mass in the new stone church, its bell ringing over the fields. The villagers gather, bowing their heads as hymns fill the air. Yet later, as night falls, families gather around fires, recounting tales of the gods, planting seeds by the cycles of the moon, marking the sacred days in secret. Outwardly, the Spaniards' world had triumphed, but inwardly, the Maya world lived on. As you rest, picture Tayasal shining one last time under the moonlight before the cannons came. Hear the voices of its people, chanting prayers that blended sorrow and defiance, their temple fires glowing on the water's surface. Though the city would fall, the spirit it carried did not. For even as kingdoms crumbled, the Maya remained, in their languages, their traditions, their stories, and their maize fields swaying under the sun. The conquest brought suffering, loss, and upheaval. It ended an age of kings and cities, yet it was not the end of the Maya. Survival became their triumph, quiet and unyielding, carried not in monuments of stone, but in the living hearts of their descendants. The stone cities had fallen quiet. Their plazas were empty, their temples overgrown, their kings dethroned. Yet the Maya story did not end with conquest, nor with the last embers of Tayasal. It carried on quietly and steadfastly in the villages, the languages, and the memories of a people who refused to vanish. The Maya, though scarred by centuries of struggle, remained, and remain still today, a living civilization whose legacy stretches across the ages. To speak of their legacy is to walk through many realms at once: the sacred, the scientific, the artistic, and the everyday. For the Maya left behind more than ruins. They left a way of seeing the world that continues to shape lives. At the heart of Maya legacy lies their mastery of time. Their calendars, crafted with stunning precision, remain a marvel even to modern eyes. The Tzolk'in, with its 260 sacred days, and the Harb, with its solar year, spoke of cycles turning like gears within the cosmos. Together they created the calendar round, a great wheel that echoed the rhythm of generations. And then there was the long count, stretching across thousands of years, placing human history within the vast expanse of creation itself. To the Maya, time was not a line, but a circle, an eternal return. Ages rose and fell, but nothing was ever truly lost. The same stars that guided their ancestors still shine upon us now, and their calendars remind us that every day has meaning, every cycle its purpose. Even today, Maya daykeepers in Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize continue to mark the sacred days, lighting incense and offering prayers. They read the energies of the calendar, guiding their communities just as their ancestors once did. In their hands, time is not a ticking clock, but a living, breathing companion. The Maya legacy also lives in the maize fields that still cover their homelands. For thousands of years, maize has been more than food. It has been identity, sustenance, and symbol. The Popol Vuh, the great Maya book of creation, tells us that humans were fashioned from maize dough, yellow and white, shaped by the gods. To be Maya is to be people of the corn. Even now, families rise with the dawn to plant their milpas, small plots of maize interwoven with beans and squash. The rhythm of planting and harvest binds them to their ancestors, who once offered the first kernels to the gods in thanks. Maize stalks swaying under the sun are living monuments, as sacred as any temple, carrying forward a tradition that has never been broken. Though many codices, the painted books of the Maya, were burned by Spanish hands, a few survived, and from them we glimpse their vast knowledge. The Dresden Codex, for instance, reveals intricate tables of eclipses, Venus cycles, and rituals tied to the heavens. These were not myths alone, but sophisticated scientific observations woven with spiritual meaning. And then there is the Popol Vuh, preserved in secret and written down in the colonial era. In its verses, we still hear the laughter of the hero twins as they face the lords of Xibalba, the echo of the first dawn, the story of maize as gift and life. These stories are not relics of the past, but threads in a fabric that still binds Maya people today. Around village fires, grandparents still tell tales of gods, animals, and ancestors, ensuring that memory never fades. Of course, the ruins themselves stand as part of the Maya legacy. Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and countless others rise like giants among the forests, their pyramids piercing through canopies of green. Though vines may cover their steps, though birds may nest in their stones, they still speak of the grandeur of a civilization that could dream in stone and make those dreams real. To climb a pyramid at dawn and watch the mist roll over the jungle is to feel the breath of history on your skin. To walk through plazas where once thousands gathered is to hear faintly the rhythm of drums and the chanting of prayers. These ruins are not empty. They are alive with memory, a testament that greatness never truly disappears. Tourists from across the world now come to gaze at them, but for Maya communities, they are more than monuments. They are sacred places, still resonant with spirit, still aligned to the sun and stars. To visit them is to step into a living story. Another enduring gift is language. More than 30 Maya languages are still spoken today by millions across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. Each carries within it the wisdom of ancestors, the poetry of the landscape, the rhythm of ritual speech. To hear Quiche, Yucatec, Quechua, or Tzotzil spoken aloud is to step into continuity stretching back centuries. The words that once echoed in royal courts and village fields still shape prayers, lullabies, and daily conversation. In them, the world is named anew, carrying both survival and resilience. Maya artistry too lives on. From the painted murals of Bonampak to the carved stelae of Copan, from jade masks to obsidian blades, their creativity was boundless. Today, that spirit continues in the vibrant textiles woven on backstrap looms, each design carrying meaning, each thread a prayer. Bright huipilis embroidered with flowers, birds, and sacred symbols are worn proudly by Maya women, connecting them to generations past. Pottery, basketry, and wood carving also continue, often blending ancient motifs with modern expression. Every craft is both survival and storytelling, carrying the colors of a people who see beauty as inseparable from life. The conquest brought Christianity, but the Maya did not surrender their gods. Instead, they wove the new faith into their own traditions, creating a unique spiritual tapestry. Churches rose upon old temples, but inside rituals carried echoes of Chac, Ixchel, and Kukulkan. Saints were venerated but often seen as guardians of maize or rain, blending seamlessly with older deities. This blending, known as syncretism, allowed the Maya to preserve their spirit under the weight of foreign rule. Even today, processions in highland towns carry both crosses and incense, both candles and maize, showing that the old and new can coexist in harmony. The greatest legacy of the Maya is not in stone, calendar, or story. It is in the people themselves. Millions of Maya descendants live across Central America, carrying their traditions, languages, and identity into the modern world. They farm, weave, teach, and build, just as their ancestors did, but also embrace new paths, blending ancient heritage with contemporary life. In Guatemala's highlands, daykeepers still light incense to mark sacred days. In Yucatan, farmers still plant maize by the phases of the moon. In Belize, children still learn Maya words alongside Spanish and English. The Maya are not a vanished civilization, but a living one, resilient, diverse, and proud. Their endurance is a reminder that conquest did not erase them. They adapted, they survived, and they continue to thrive. The temples may be silent, but the people are not. Their voices carry forward, echoing through time. As you drift into sleep, imagine yourself lying beneath the stars of the Maya sky. Above, the constellations glow, the Milky Way stretching across like the white road the Maya called the Sacbe of the heavens. Around you, the jungle hums softly, the stones of ancient temples rise from the earth, and the voices of ancestors whisper in the wind. The story of the Maya is not simply one of rise and fall. It is a story of continuity, of resilience, of a people who understood that time turns in cycles, not in straight lines. Their kings may be gone, their empires faded, but their legacy endures. In the maize that feeds, the languages that sing, the calendars that guide, and the hearts that remember. So as your eyes grow heavy, think of the pyramids rising through the jungle mist, the serpent of light descending at Chichen Itza, the laughter of children in Maya villages today. Think of cycles turning, of maize sprouting anew, of stars guiding us across the night. The Maya are not lost. They are with us still, their story continuing, their legacy eternal.